February 1920, Berlin. Police drag a young woman from the frozen landward canal after a suicide attempt. She has no papers, no name, and deep scars across her skull and body she refuses to explain. Doctors admit her to a public asylum as an unidentified patient, just a case number on a chart. Nobody in that cold ward could imagine she was about to become one of the most famous women alive. This is the story of Anastasia Romanov, the youngest daughter of Russia's last Tsar, and the mysterious stranger who would spend 60 years insisting she never died. Aunts, uncles, tutors, and childhood friends of the real Anastasia would eventually sit across from this silent woman. Some swore it was her. Others walked out calling her a fraud. Decades of secret meetings, forged documents, and courtroom battles followed. It took more than 70 years, and one forgotten jar of hospital tissue, to finally answer who she actually was. But to understand why an entire royal family couldn't agree on the identity of one woman for 6 decades, you have to go back 3 years earlier, to a locked basement in Russia. July 1918. Bolshevik revolutionaries hold former Tsar Nicholas II, his wife, and their 5 children under house arrest in the city of Ekaterinburg. Anastasia is 17 years old. Just after midnight, guards wake the entire family and lead them down into the house's basement, telling them it's only for a photograph. It is a lie. A firing squad opens fire in the cramped, windowless room. When the gunfire finally stops, soldiers move in with bayonets to make certain no one in that family is still breathing. The bodies are loaded onto a truck, driven into the forest, burned, doused in acid, and buried in unmarked ground. For decades, the Soviet government releases almost no details about that night. With no public grave, no photographs, and no official confirmation, rumors spread fast across Europe's royal courts. Maybe one daughter escaped the basement. Maybe a guard couldn't kill a child. Berlin, in those years, has become a magnet for Russian aristocrats fleeing the revolution, filling its cafes and drawing rooms with former dukes and countesses now living far more modestly than they once were. The name Anastasia becomes a whisper across exiled Russian nobility, not because there's any real evidence she survived, but because uncertainty leaves the door open, and grieving families want desperately to walk through it. So when a nameless woman surfaces in a Berlin asylum 2 years later, and a fellow patient claims she resembles the missing Grand Duchess, the rumor suddenly has a face attached to it. One patient tells a nurse. The nurse tells a friend. Within weeks, newspapers across Germany are running the same headline: the youngest Romanov daughter may still be alive. Strangely, the woman herself never actually announces the claim. At first she refuses to speak at all, giving doctors nothing about her past, her family, or her identity. Record-keeping across revolutionary Russia had collapsed along with the government itself, so there were no birth certificates, no fingerprints, no dental charts anywhere to quickly settle the question one way or the other. But over months, she starts revealing details that seem impossible to fake: a childhood surgical scar matching Anastasia's, private nicknames used only inside the Romanov household, memories of exact rooms in the palace. By 1922, the press has given her a new name, Anna Anderson. And one by one, Romanov relatives start arriving at her hospital room, determined to test her themselves. One of the Tsar's own cousins visits and leaves convinced. Other members of the old imperial circle spend hours questioning her in private, some leaving in tears, certain they've found their princess. Even Anastasia's aunt, Grand Duchess Olga, travels from Denmark to see her several times, holding her hand, weeping beside her bed, treating her at first like a long-lost niece finally found. For a woman who technically claims nothing outright, she has somehow convinced some of the most guarded, skeptical aristocrats in Europe that the impossible actually happened in that basement. But belief was never universal, and the family that should have been most eager to welcome her home turns out to be the most bitterly divided of all. The extended Romanov family splits into two camps. One side desperately wants to believe a piece of their murdered relatives survived. The other suspects an elaborate con. Anastasia's own grandmother, the Dowager Empress, refuses to even meet the woman, calling the entire claim a painful, embarrassing insult to a family already destroyed by grief. Meanwhile, former palace staff who spent years around the real Anastasia look at Anna Anderson and insist, flatly, that they are looking at a complete stranger. One childhood playmate says the eyes are wrong. A former nurse says the ears don't match. Tiny physical details suddenly become battlegrounds in a war over identity and inheritance. Because if she really is Anastasia, she isn't just a rescued relative. She becomes a legal heir to a fortune, and to a name still worth fighting over. That single fact turns a possible family reunion into a decades-long legal war, complete with private investigators, forged letters, and lawyers on every side of the Atlantic. German courts open a formal case in the 1930s that will run, on and off, for the next 32 years, becoming one of the longest-running legal battles in the country's history. The case becomes such a public sensation that European newspapers nickname it the trial of the century, with reporters camping outside the courtroom for weeks waiting on a verdict. While the courts argue in circles for years, one private investigator, hired by a skeptical relative, sets out to answer a far simpler question: if she isn't Anastasia, then who actually is she? In 1927, his search leads him to Poland, and to the family of a missing factory worker named Franziska Shanskowska, who vanished from her job in Berlin years earlier. Franziska disappeared from Berlin in 1920, the exact same year the unnamed woman was pulled from the Canal. Her own family recognizes photographs of Anna Anderson almost instantly. Franziska's own brother travels to visit Anna Anderson in person. He insists, without hesitation, that she is his sister. She refuses to answer a single question he asks her in Polish. German newspapers run the story as a full-blown scandal, printing photographs of the two women side by side and declaring the mystery solved: a missing seamstress, not a lost duchess. It should have ended the story completely. Instead, Anna Anderson simply stops responding to the accusation, and her wealthiest supporters dismiss the entire investigation as a jealous smear campaign. For every relative convinced by the Polish evidence, another remains loyal to her for the rest of their lives. The public doubt never fully closes, and neither does the case. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss what's next. Anna Anderson spends the following decades drifting between clinics, borrowed apartments, and the homes of wealthy sympathizers around Europe who quietly fund her entire lifestyle. In 1938, her case finally reaches German court, where she formally petitions to be legally recognized, once and for all, as Grand Duchess Anastasia Romanov. The case drags on through the rise of Nazi Germany, somehow survives the destruction of the Second World War, and continues rolling through the 1950s, outliving nearly every witness from 1918. In 1957, a German court rules against her, citing insufficient evidence either way. She appeals immediately. In 1970, the case reaches its final verdict, still officially unresolved. After 32 years, no German court ever definitively proves she is Anastasia, and no German court ever definitively proves that she isn't. The mystery simply outlasts the legal system. In 1968, in her late 60s, she moves to Virginia and marries an American local historian, becoming Anna Anderson Manahan and settling into a quiet new life in the United States. She dies in 1984, still legally unproven, still surrounded by loyal believers and lifelong doubters, still refusing, right up to her final days, to ever fully explain herself. But before her body is cremated, a Virginia hospital quietly keeps something behind, a small sample of intestinal tissue, removed years earlier during routine surgery, and simply never discarded. That forgotten sliver of tissue sits untouched in storage for nearly a decade. Nobody yet realizes it's about to answer the exact question 60 years of courts never could. In the early 1990s, DNA testing finally becomes advanced enough to compare genetic material across generations, even using tiny samples decades old, from bodies buried for over 70 years. Even a few preserved cells can hold enough genetic material for a full comparison, since DNA remains locked inside almost every cell of the body long after a person has died, waiting for the right technology to read it. Around the same time, remains believed to belong to the executed Romanov family are exhumed from a shallow grave outside Ekaterinburg, giving scientists a genetic reference to actually compare against. Researchers pull Anna Anderson's preserved tissue sample from storage and run a direct genetic comparison, first against the Romanov remains, then against living Romanov relatives who volunteer their own blood. In 1994, the results are published in the scientific journal Nature Genetics, and they are unambiguous. Anna Anderson's DNA does not match the Romanov family. Not even close. Instead, her genetic profile matches a living relative of the Skanskowski family, the exact same Polish family the private investigator had named almost 70 years earlier, in 1927. The missing factory worker theory, mocked and dismissed for decades as a jealous smear campaign, turns out to have been correct the entire time. The evidence had been sitting in a Polish family's memory since 1927. Science simply needed almost 70 more years to catch up to what they already knew. So the woman pulled from that Berlin canal in 1920 was almost certainly never Anastasia Romanov at all. She was Franziska Shanskowska, a missing factory worker with no royal blood. The real Anastasia, historians now confirm through DNA taken from the exhumed remains, died in that Ekaterinburg basement in 1918 along with the rest of her family, exactly as claimed. Which means for 60 straight years, dukes, duchesses, journalists, and courts across 3 different countries argued endlessly over a woman who was never who she claimed to be. She never confessed to the lie. She never explained why she let an entire family believe it for 6 decades. Whatever drove her to hold on to that story died with her in 1984. And the strangest part is she was proven wrong twice, first by an investigator in 1927, then by science in 1994, and somehow believers stayed loyal to her both times. Historians now believe grief, not greed, kept the legend alive so long. A family that lost everything in one night simply couldn't stop hoping a piece of it had survived. It's a strange kind of comfort, an entire royal house choosing a stranger's story over an unbearable truth, for 60 years, rather than accept that nobody made it out of that basement. Stories like hers tend to survive long after the facts are settled, because they offer something history rarely does, a second chance, a door left slightly open where, in truth, that door had already been closed forever, sealed shut in a basement nobody was allowed to see. If you found out your entire family history was built on a stranger's lie, would you even want the truth, 60 years too late? Tell us below.